I am happy to be here today and talk to you a little bit about some of my experience. And when you give your presentations, pitches, and everything else, you always start with your caveats, and I'm going to start with mine. And my caveats are that these are my opinions. These are my opinions that have been formed through 30 years of a career in industry and then as an entrepreneur myself and growing small businesses and being involved in the investor community, doing a lot of mentorship, sitting on panels, reviewing pitches, spending time working with other investors and other entrepreneurs, and I formed these opinions. And actually some of the things in my presentation will be opinions from other people that I know, and people, actually one of them I think is going to be here next week. I'm going to talk about one of their methodologies that they focus on. But let's just start. If you notice down in the left-hand corner, my name, my email, and my phone number. If you are out trying to do something in the entrepreneurial community, you just want to have a little chat with, I call it the whiteboard chat, where you want to kind of sketch some things, don't hesitate to call. I actually love what I do. I was very fortunate to have some of the success that I have that has allowed me now to get involved in the way that I do and give back. So let's talk about a little bit. Amanda gave you kind of a brief sketch, but let's talk about how I got on my journey and see how that may relate to your journey. And I always start at my childhood, and the reason I start at my childhood is I had a great role model in my house, and many of you probably have really good role models in your house or people that you know. And it really helps to get an established role model to put you on a path of where you're going to go and help you make decisions along the way. And one of the defining reasons I talk about my childhood is I was raised in a family. I didn't have the silver spoon, I had the platinum spoon in my mouth, and so I didn't have a lot to worry about. But one of the things that I remember, having a father who was a C-level executive at a Fortune 100 company, was he always talked about a desire to do something on his own. But he would never make that leap from corporate or industry into something on his own. There was a certain level of fear. And as I went through my career and I was on a very similar path to my dad, recognizing the same thing, I decided I was going to take that leap. I came out of BYU in the business school, and then I started in big corporate. We're not going to spend a lot of time because there's other material that we want to dive deeply into, but that's a little bit about my background. Some of those are very interesting companies. The one I like to focus on is Bomar Instrument Corporation, because they're an example of a business that you all should recognize. And does anybody in this room, outside of one, does anybody in this room know anything about Bomar Instrument Corporation? Notice no hands. I find that really, really interesting, because Bomar should have been a household name. There's a great Harvard Business Review about Bomar Instrument, and I encourage you, if you want to see what not to do, go read it. It's actually fabulous. So Bomar invented the handheld calculator. Not something we all use much today because we have other electronic tools with our computers, but they invented the handheld calculator. And at the same time, they commercialized the microwave oven. Now they made one very big mistake, and I use these examples because I think they will help you as you look at things not to do. They went to TI believing that they had all the IP, intellectual property, patents, and everything else to protect them, and asked TI to be their contract manufacturer. That sounds like a great idea, right? We all know Texas Instruments, even though they're not as strong as they used to be. We all recognize that name. But TI thought, this is great. We figured out ways around their patent, and we will lead. TI decided they're going to lead the industry in the handheld calculator market. And that was the first handheld calculator. Most of you probably aren't old enough to know that, but I am. And Bomar all of a sudden found themselves in this huge problem needing to fight TI to protect what they had invented. And so what did they do? They turned around and sold their microwave oven to Litton Industries, and that's how Litton got in the microwave industry. So there's what should have been a household name, and not one person outside of one in this room knows who they are. Well, maybe two or three. So I was on my path on a normal C-level type executive role, but I got really involved in mergers and acquisitions and turnarounds, which was really a lot of fun. I had a new assignment about every 6 months. We'd do an acquisition or do something that required me to go in and fix some broken things, and once it got fixed, they'd hand it off to somebody who could just operate it. Well, that's not a lot of fun to fix broken things and then just have them operate. So I decided, unlike my father, I was going to drop out and try and do something on my own. And this is in the early 90s. I was actually here in Salt Lake running a large subsidiary of Harman International, and I had a very close friend that we had been engaged in business before, and we started looking at things to do. And some of the first few things I looked at was being a PGA tournament operator. Why? My partner and I loved golf, and we thought this would be great. and we looked at running the Quad Cities Open. And we had a segue in. This is another lesson to learn. Make sure that you have a diversified group of individuals around you that can help connect you. Don't rely on one, because we did, and unfortunately he was an elderly gentleman who passed away 3 months before our contract was supposed to be submitted for authorization. So that just, boom, we're done, we're out of that. So we decided we established an M&A firm, and we started our first company in 1995. And I didn't start from the scratch like many of you are going to. So at this point, let me ask the quick question. How many of you want to be an entrepreneur? Mark, you didn't have to raise your hand, you already are.
It's still in there.
And so how many are taking the class just because they want to learn about entrepreneurism? Okay, great. Well, let me first start with saying all of you, every single one of you will be an entrepreneur in one way, shape, or form. Because even as an employee, you're technically an entrepreneur. And why do I say that? Well, when you go out for an interview, what are you doing? You're actually trying to sell yourself. It is no different than the entrepreneurial process. You have to analyze what it is that you're looking for, analyze what you're going to do, put your game plan together, go out and pitch yourself. So even if you're not planning on being an entrepreneur in terms of what that word means, you will use the tools that you learn in this class or other classes like it throughout your career. So, and there will be some tips in here that I think that would be applied to even those of you that aren't going to be entrepreneurs. This is a little bit about my journey that started in 1995, and my last formal exit was in 2008. There are some company names here, and they're all very different. The first company was we acquired a company that did tear gas dye packs for the bank robbery industry, and everybody has seen those in the movies, the exploding money and things like that. And that allowed me to write some patents and grow the industry and launch it in multiple countries around the world. But in this list, there are successes and failures. And I think it's really important to point that out. Not every successful entrepreneur always succeeds. In fact, very few always succeed. There's a couple that I know of right now that are big names. I won't use their names. They're in their next venture, and they're not doing very well. So there's no magic formula. If there was a magic formula, then we could give you that formula and you'd be successful. So it just doesn't work that way. It is a lot of work, a lot of trial, a lot of error, a lot of qualification, a lot of quantification, all rolled up into something that also takes a lot of luck. So on this list, there's multiple successes. USCPC was a great success. The golf industry should have been a great success, but our timing was really bad. Right? That's something else that happens. The market conditions can really change things. We entered the golf industry right as the golf industry began to consolidate and collapse. And so here we had great brand names. I had Adidas and I had Greg Norman. Those are great names in the golf industry, but unfortunately the industry was collapsing around us, so the growth pattern wasn't there. So the timing was bad. So I came back to Utah back in, roughly the mid-2000s, a little late kind of 2000s, about 2005-06, and I went back into the corporate structure. So from 95 till 2006, with our last exit being 2008, this typical entrepreneurial growth, a lot of aggressive, working most of my life, 20 hours a day, traveling 200 days a year all over the world. It seems luxurious, right? It's not. It's work. But I came back here to Utah out of desire. I wanted to be here and wanted to have our family back here. So we came back here, and I joined up with a company called DXNA, which did a molecular diagnostic application. Now I'm in the medical space, which is very different than my background, but it was to focus on commercialization, turnaround, and raising capital. And I went out to New York and raised $10 million in capital, and then began to kind of get them commercialized, and then got away from that and started saying, okay, I'm back in corporate, now what do I want to do? But the one thing I noticed about Utah was the landscape had really changed. Even though the people and the players were relatively the same. So if you look at the Utah Technology Council, Rich has been around this valley in this environment since the early 90s, maybe before. And he still plays in that role today. So it is a small market. A lot of the players are the same. But there was a really big different approach in the government sector. Mark mentioned U-Star as an example. All of a sudden U-Star was there. The governor had changed the method Governor Huntsman changed the method in how money was going to be given out to early stage companies. No longer was it you get the money and you perform, it was you perform and get the money, which is really interesting. If you're a startup company and you need money, well, typically most startups do, right? Well, now you turn to the government and they say, well, perform first and we'll give you the money. It's kind of like a chicken and egg, right? A catch-22. But what was really interesting is the Valley was considered a booming entrepreneurial environment. How many of you heard of Silicon Slopes? Right? We all know Silicon Valley, but we coined this area Silicon Slopes. And what was really interesting is there's a couple key things here to look at and why this is a great place to be an entrepreneur and start a business. First of all, it was the #1 place for business 4 out of 5 years in a row, named by Forbes. That's a great accolade to have, right? I mean, you're not going to find that 4 out of 5 as the #1. We ranked in the top 10 in 5 key business policy areas. I won't name what those are, but we're the only state that does that ranks in the top 10 in the 5 top key business policy areas. And then furthermore, there was an ecosystem developing here. So those of you that are moving out and thinking about your pitches and thinking about becoming an entrepreneur, get involved in the ecosystem. Get involved with WBI, get involved with incubators, get involved with collaborators. There are so many opportunities here for you to actually go out and learn outside of the classroom and get involved and make those connections. If you're an entrepreneur and you're not getting connected, or if you're getting ready to do a pitch and you're not getting connected and having people vet that pitch before you go out and give it, you're really doing yourself a disservice, because the opportunities are here, and most importantly, most of them are free. Okay, this is your eye chart for the day. As we kind of move into what moves and drives your pitch and what moves investors, a little bit about my background and why I think I have some really good, strong opinions and ideas related to this. I sit on the WBI, the Wayne Brown Institute, as one of their Board of Trustee members. But prior to that, I was actually involved with them as an entrepreneur. I actually took companies through their process, and I saw the benefit that they provide, and they're very unique, right? You have different segments that I think are really important for you to understand. When you're first launching, you're going to look at a company like a Boom Startup or someone like that that's going to kind of help organize you and motivate you and push you to do all the touch points to the potential customers and things like that. But then once you're started and you have that little bit of money, there's this huge gap in funding, and we call it the Great Chasm, right? You get this early stage money, your first $100,000, you think, boom, we're ready to go. You run out of that $100,000, it's like, how do I get that next $500,000? Are we not on?
No, the microphones are bumping into each other. I'll just fix that real quick.
I feel like I'm getting dressed. But how do you get across that great chasm? And that great chasm is really what the WBI is structured to do, is to get you across that great chasm. Are they great? Are they the only ones who can do that? No, but they're a great organization. The SLCA is one of the 3 angel investment groups here in the Valley. You have the Utah Angels, which I also participate in. You have SLCA, which is up on the north side of Point of the Mountain. And then you have Park City Angel Network. Those are the 3 primary angel network groups here. Originally, I was a member of SLCA, then I became on their board. And 2 years ago, I was asked to become their executive director. It's really nothing more than a title. It doesn't increase necessarily what I do. I have a great administrator who does a lot of work for me, but allows me to connect outside of Utah, which is really, really important. I try and find capital because we have a good capital market here, but we don't have the amount of money and the players that, as an example, the Bay Area has. I was in a meeting last week with about 20 people in the Bay, 2 weeks ago, 20 people in the Bay Area, and I think the lightest net worth in that room was probably in excess of $10 to $20 million. So they have very strong net worth. We have a lot of really wealthy players here, but we only have a small number of those wealthy players. I also get involved with other groups, the Angel Capital Association, which is a national-based organization, and some of the other local and national groups. And just so you know, I don't just look at the world as an investor today. I stay very, very active on the operator front. I still own and operate a flight simulation company, and I'm very involved with projects, some which have spun out of the local area, like WaterJet and Bastion Biologics, and I work at the commercialization office as a consultant at the University of Utah. So I stay very active in both fronts. And I think that's very, very important. It keeps me fresh in what it is in my approach. So let's talk about you guys. You want to be this entrepreneur. And I think half the class or more said, I want to be an entrepreneur. And what's really interesting is what I'm going to start with on the next slide is really, do you have what it takes? Because what does it really take? Keep in mind, I think I already established that there's not a model. There's not a consistent model that we can just lay it out, right? And it's, you go from A to B to C to D. Let's start with the personality type. You have to have a very unique personality to be an entrepreneur or to be successful in anybody can be an entrepreneur. But this is about being successful as an entrepreneur. And there are basically, it's been determined that there's roughly 16 personality types in business. And there's only 4 of those that have the potential to be a successful entrepreneur. Now I would encourage you to go take a test, which you can do online at venturecapital.org, and it's the entrepreneurial assessment. And the reason I suggest you do that, it lets you know, do you fit that profile? And if you don't, what could you possibly do to migrate you towards that profile? Because it's really important to understand that just waking up and saying, I want to be an entrepreneur, doesn't make you an entrepreneur. The next concept is, do you have the social and economic structure behind you to actually be an entrepreneur? I always joke, I want to pitch for the Yankees. That's not likely to happen. In fact, at my age, I know it's not going to happen. But even when I was in my prime and I could throw the ball very hard and very good, I knew I was never a candidate to pitch for the Yankees. So when you look at it and you say, I want to be an entrepreneur, understand that entrepreneurism is a lifestyle. It's not like you get up in the morning and you go to work from 8 to 5 and you get a paycheck. You create your paycheck. And you may be running different businesses where all of a sudden you have employees that come first. And if you don't have the right environment around you, maybe the right social structure, maybe the right family structure, that may or may not work for you. If you all of a sudden can't bring home a paycheck to buy groceries next week because you had to pay your employees first, is that going to fly very far in your family? I have no clue, but that's a quick internal question you need to ask yourself. And then are you committed? And I mean really, really committed, because there are extreme highs being an entrepreneur and building something for yourself and building a very successful platform, a very, very successful business. But for every really huge high, there's probably at least a half a dozen or more lows. And can you fight through those lows recognizing that the high is going to come? And finally, what's your fallback plan? And I always suggest, I know you don't need one because only 1 in 1,000 entrepreneurs make it to success. So do you have that fallback plan? And I think it's really important to be realistic as you go down this journey. Because if you're realistic, you have a better likelihood of not only being successful, but fighting through the really difficult times. As an entrepreneur, you may go multiple years without ever getting paid, living off your last deal that you sold. That's a reality in being an entrepreneur and getting past that big point. So what are your challenges ahead? Now we're going to kind of get into the pitch concept. And as we look at the pitch concept, let's talk about what some of the challenges are. First and foremost, do you have the personality to go raise money? Do you like having doors slammed in your face? Do you like hearing the word no? You better, because that's a big part of it. You hear more no's than you hear yeses, you hear more turn downs. Do you have the time? This is a full-time commitment. So part of that being with the time is the rejection. What happens if it goes south? Will you give up? How much are you really, really willing to sacrifice? And if you're up to that challenge, let's talk about where you go from there. Let's talk about, I know that a lot of your class, I'm not going to talk about organizing in the path. I'm going to talk about what's going to get you to money, because I think that that's what's really, you really want to know. How do I get to money, right? Because you probably don't have a big bank account that you can start writing checks tomorrow for your great idea. So I put down Business Plan 101. I'm an old guy, I still like business plans, but the new concept is Lean Canvas. And Lean Canvas is really nothing more than a very structured business plan put on one sheet of paper. It covers a lot of elements. If you look at the I-Corps program, which is actually used at the NIH, the National Institute of Health, as a platform, it really takes all the various elements and puts them on a one sheet of paper. And I always start with this to make sure that you've got a good comprehensive understanding of what it is that you're doing, that you really have supportable elements to what it is that your business plan suggests. This isn't something that you just sit back and go, yep, this is a great idea, everybody's going to love it. Have you gone out and really vetted it? Have you gone out and done that touch points to about 100 different potential customers to see if you're reaching a pain point of theirs, a pain point that they're willing to pay you for? That customer validation becomes key to the overall success or likelihood of success of what you're doing. And then finally, in this lean canvas, business comprehension, putting it all together, get somebody who's been there, get somebody who's an expert. In reality, there's not necessarily really a true expert, but there's a lot of people who've been down this trail and they understand what works and what doesn't. But in reality, it's all opinions. So get somebody on your team who's been there and done that. It's really, really important. So after you get this big summary, well, how do you get my attention as an investor? Well, that's where I want to see your executive summary. And most people sit down and try and write their executive summary first. It's a one-page document of a big bunch of information. So how do you write that first? Well, it's actually you write it second. You start with your lean canvas, your business plan, whatever you want to call it, that kind of puts all the elements together. And then from there, you basically create that one-page hook. That's how you're going to get me, the fish, on the line. You're going to throw that bait in the water and I'm going to bite. And it's more important that not only in these items, that when you think about landing the fish, you got to get them in the boat and keep them in the boat. So when you look at these type of things, think about the information you're putting in and make sure it's not misleading. So, steps to capital. I'm assuming that you've probably been through this in your class, but let's focus on just for a minute. Start with your anti-dilution items, because when you start raising external capital, it gets really costly really quick. You are going to give up a lot of your company in your early raises. You're going to give up a lot of company every time you raise money, but trust me, in the early stages, your valuation is minuscule. I mean, I've seen companies come through the angel network looking for $500,000 on a $1 million valuation. They're willing to give up 50%. How many of you have watched Shark Tank? I'm sure everybody in this room being in the entrepreneurial class. It's a great example, right? I mean, how many people walk on and I want $20,000 for 35% of my company? Now, Shark Tank's really different because you're getting somebody who can facilitate inroads that you can't do. So the value is much higher than what it is in the reality of the dollars. But it's the same when you're out looking for capital, when you're out talking to some of these investment groups, when you're giving your pitch. Align yourself with people who can actually help you. Giving you money doesn't necessarily help you. It might actually hinder you if you get money from the wrong individuals. So look at these anti-dilution opportunities first. How much money? Are you willing to put your house up on a secondary mortgage if you happen to own one? Are you willing to go borrow $100,000 from your parents or whatever it may take, or your sibling or whatever? Look at those anti-dilution items first. They're very critical into how investors will look at you going forward. How much skin do you have in the game? But more importantly, it keeps that dilution minimized till you actually know you have somewhere to go. Then you're going to look at your early stage investors. Those are your friends, family, former friends, former family that will absolutely become those after you borrow money from them and things go south. They will be your former friends and former family. You will not come to Thanksgiving dinner anymore. You go to your angel groups. Look at your accelerators. That's kind of a new model, the accelerator. Also look at one of the new emerging areas that we're seeing, and that's these Kickstart campaigns. You know, Kickstart or Indiegogo. Look at those type of campaigns because they're great validators. If you have a technology that you're going to be selling to consumers, if you don't go down that path first as a validator, you're missing a huge opportunity. You're missing an opportunity to help fund your business, and you're missing more of an opportunity in terms of validating your model or validating what it is that you're coming up with. And then finally, the post-revenue or your growth stage. Those are the big players, the private equity, the venture, strategic partners. Won't spend much time there because most of you aren't there yet. So what do we look for? Next week you're going to see, you're going to be presented to by Sam Bernard from Peak Capital. I think Peak Capital has done an excellent job in breaking it down into 5 key items. And Sam's going to talk about this next week, so I'll try not to steal, even though a lot of my presentation is built around those 5 T's. And you call them the 5 T's: team, technical, traction, terms, and 10X. I think Bill Reichert from Garage Ventures describes it differently, but complementary, the same in terms of value to you. And that is what he calls getting to wow. Go on to Garage Ventures, do yourself a favor, read Bill Reichert's approach in getting to wow. And the reason I say that is he really breaks it down to what's critically important. And that's the first 4 sentences that explain your business. Really quick, does anybody in here have something they're pitching or launching? Okay, what is it?
I have a couple.
Just give me one.
One of them is it's an actual product that needs to be manufactured, but it helps fertilize lawns. Basically, is the
Okay. So I don't want to pick on you, but I'm going to use that, okay, just for an example, okay? Because this is exactly what Bill Reichert is talking about. You did it much simpler. Most of us say we've got this unique widget that, and we spill out something that's meaningless to the person you're talking to. They're like, huh? What did you just say? And so what you said, I've got this thing, it's an actual product, and it's going to fertilize lawns. That's not going to wow me, right? Okay? So you need to build that 4 sentences that when you're done, I go, wow, I want to talk to you. I want to spend more time with you. I want to learn more about what you're doing, and I want to learn how you're going to take my money and make me rich. Okay? So if you can't get there, you're not where you need to go to start pitching. He breaks down what he calls 3 principles. Be clear. Okay? So we need to be clear. Be credible. And be compelling. And if you can get those 4 sentences that meet those 3 principles, you're probably going to get the attention of every funding mechanism you can think of. And then finally, he breaks basically your framework down into 4 elements: context, benefit, differentiation, and then a call to action. If you tell me about your idea and you don't leave me with a call to action, then you've missed your opportunity for your follow-up. If you just say, hey, here's my great idea, thank you very much, I'm going to go have lunch now, I'm out of here, see you later, I know you're going to call me, probably not going to happen. So try and build that call to action. So now let's dig just a little deeper. Let's talk about the 5 T's. And I won't spend a ton of time. I think probably want to wrap up in about 5 minutes or so for questions. But let's dig just a little deeper. Let's start with the team. Are you a first-time serial entrepreneur, or are you going to be a serial entrepreneur? And if you are, do you have industry knowledge? Do you have your skin in the game? And are you really driven from success, not money? Because guess what? You're going to live on ramen. Because I can guarantee you're going to come out of college and you're going to see your peers who've decided they want to go corporate America, get a weekly paycheck. They're going to make, I don't know what the average salary on a fresh out is nowadays, but in the business community, I imagine it's 50 to 60 grand a year. And you're going to be making $2 grand a month. How exciting is that? And so you really have to be driven by the success coming down the line, recognizing that at the end of this game, your goal is to sell whatever it is that you're doing for millions of dollars and pocket that money. And while your buddies were making 50, 60 grand over 5 years, they made about 300 grand, and you want to make 3 million or more, 5 million or 10 million, or, use some of the examples like Josh James, who made a lot more than that, or we can use the examples here locally. Recognizing that you're not just an employee. If you're going to approach this like you would be an employee, you're not going to get the investors excited. Okay, let's talk about the technology. First of all, let's start with, and I use these phrases, old, new, borrowed, or blue. We all heard those phrases, or at least I'm old enough to have heard those phrases. I'm assuming you probably have. Where does it really fit? Is this something that's old? Is it revolutionary? Is it evolutionary? Do you understand the difference in those terms? Revolutionary being something that's really new. I'll use an evolutionary example right here in the Valley. That wasn't revolutionary. Their approach might have been revolutionary, but their technology and product was not. Vivint. We've all heard of Vivint. You look at what they did. Now, it used to be Apex, and they failed. They restructured, and look where they are today. But Vivint's a great example where you can be a successful entrepreneur with something that's not new at all. It's just how they approached it. Okay? They sell something that's being sold for 30 years or more, probably more, 40. But yet, look how successful they are. So understand where you fit and build your business plan or your roadmap around that. Build where you're going around that. Recognize, know what category you fit in. Understand your technology protection. How many people think they understand intellectual property? Patents. So. Okay, well, here's a phrase I see in pitches all the time, and it's my biggest red flag that goes up and says, they don't understand what they need to understand. There's a difference between a patent, which is something that says what you have is protected, and what's called a freedom to operate, which is the ability to use your technology and sell it. If you don't know that difference, go learn. Because if you come and pitch me or one of my comparatives out in the industry, and you don't understand what freedom to operate means, and you haven't done the background check to understand whether what it is that you think is your next whiz-bang idea can actually be sold without licensing from third parties, technology, you're not ready. So spend your time to understand those key elements. That freedom to operate is critical. Are you selling a product, or do you have a platform? Products don't make a single product doesn't make a great company. Okay? Think about what Vivint did. They're another great example. I'll use them periodically because they're so known here in the Valley. But originally they started with alarm systems. Then they went into the kind of the controlled access. Then they went into the commercial market. So they've kind of bounced down as they've found new ways to keep expanding. And finally, this is the one that everybody hates to hear. How many of you guys have ideas? And I'm not picking on anybody, so you can all raise your hands now. You're safe, right? You guys probably think it's the most beautiful thing ever, and everybody's going to want it. The challenge here is recognizing that your beautiful baby is somebody's ugly stepchild. And recognize that. It's a critical element, because when you get turned down, you're like, why don't they love what I'm doing? Why don't they just love it? And understand that what you have that's beautiful may not appear that way to others, but it doesn't mean that it's not. Just stick with it. Traction, that's just, are you showing, we talked about Kickstarter, Indiegogo. That's a great way to demonstrate traction. Understand that customer validation. If you haven't gone out and talked to 100 potential customers, understood their pain point, can recite exactly how that modified your direction, then you haven't shown that you understand the word traction. Terms, it's got to be reasonable. What's going to happen if it goes south, right? Your investor's going to throw money at you. They want to make sure they have something left, more than 2 cents on the dollar. And finally, 10x. Now what's really interesting is this is the one that I quite often, I've got to be careful how I say it, because I often say that investors are greedy bastards. But we're really not. And the reason I say that is for us to get a comparable return on our money, we have to invest in deals that hopefully will produce a 10x. And at the angel world, the statistics show that we have to invest in 24 deals to get an average 15% compounded interest return on an annualized basis. It's an interesting statistic. So don't think that they're greedy. Understand why. Why that 10x becomes very critical in your early stage investors. It is how they make their money. And you need them. And so just understand that process. Your pitch. I'm going to try through these now and try and give you time for a few questions. First and foremost, understand your audience. Understand your time limits. Your average pitch is 10 minutes. If you go to 12, you're going to get cut off at 10. It's a hard stop. When you go in for a 10-minute pitch, it is a hard stop, and they will stop you. They tell you it's a 10-minute pitch. They're on a clock looking at a lot of different things. Understand how to get through in that 10 minutes. Make it simple but comprehensive. I always put this in, grab me quick or lose me fast. Right? If you don't get my attention really quick, if you don't open with that big buzz, a boom, and I'm like, I want to know more about that, I'm probably pulling out my cell phone and starting to text or look at my email or something. Focus on the key points and move on. Make sure it really is believable. It's really important. We see a lot of things where people come in and they talk about technology and you're like, I'm not so sure you're really where you think you are. And know your stuff. There could be an expert in the room. If you're doing something in the life sciences and you come in and you're going to give a very broad sketch because you want to make sure it caters to everybody, be ready for those follow-up questions from that guy who's the latest PhD in brain or whatever coming out of the University of Utah, because the angel groups are made up of people like that. So if you're going in with a technology that's really challenging and something that somebody else may have a lot of information about, know your stuff or bring your technology partner that does. Things to possibly, potentially to avoid or include, these are kind of the in the middles. Your ask, that's always one, do you, don't you? Do you walk in and say, I want $500,000 on a $5 million pre-money? And they may go, well, we don't have a $500,000, our fund's around $100,000 and we only do deals that are $2 million. That's one of those catch-22s, whether you do or you don't. Talk about your advisors, but they shouldn't be a key element of what you're doing. Leave out any questionable data. This is the one that I love. This is the one that I absolutely point out because I see it over and over and over again. And that's the statements that leave me hanging or lose my attention. And what do I mean by that? How many of you in a presentation have found yourself saying, you're talking about something and you say, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later in your presentation. Well, I'm sitting there thinking, well, I want to know now. Why do I have to wait till later? And I'm not going to pick on Amanda, but it was like Amanda telling you about my potential not getting here. And I'm like, I have to explain what that means. So, and then the old proverbial, trust me. Trust me doesn't tell me a thing. Give me the data that allows me to build that confidence in what you're doing, what you're offering, what it is that makes you unique, what makes your team unique. You know, if you have a key player on your team that's a world-renowned known individual, make sure you get that individual to the forefront. People invest in teams and individuals. Products are secondary, technologies are secondary. We know that a really great team can take a mediocre concept and really move it down the line, but a great concept can be lost in a poor team. Videos and sounds, if you are embedding videos and sounds in your presentation, get them out. It's a disaster in the making. I can't tell you how many people have wasted 3, 4, 5 minutes in a presentation trying to get their video to work. I know they're great. Right? I'm working with right now on a project that is involved in a replacement to the dental drill that uses a high pressure water stream. They want to show it because it's cool. But I can tell you having that video when it doesn't collapse, and now you've got a presentation that's missing a fundamental element that's critical. Critical. And you were relying on that video and all of a sudden it doesn't play or the sound doesn't play. Get rid of them, get them out. And then information overload. Try and get to the key points, the key elements. Go back to those concepts that we talked about that Peak Capital relies on, the 5 T's. Bill Reichert and his Getting to Wow. Make it simple, make it quick, get it there. And then what next? You can't be overly organized. You definitely won't know everything. You can't talk to or solicit too many people. This is a path that is just person after person after person, pounding, 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 pounding. You can't dig too deep on your sourcing partners. Believe me, you are not going to have the best technology out there. There's always something out there that you just don't know about, and it's not your fault. So know that you're going to have to really focus on the true benefits, why this is beneficial. By the way, everybody starts in their presentation, we have the best team. I hear everybody has the best team. Last I checked, there's only one best. Focus on the fact that you have a really good team that covers the comprehensive elements that are necessary to make this successful. Focus on why that team together will make a success. You're going to make mistakes, you're going to make pivots, that's normal. We expect it as investors. We're going to invest and then you're going to come back and say, that didn't work so well. Can we have a little more money to kind of go this direction? Understand that's going to work. Be really, really humble. Don't come to the table over egotistical. You have to be really confident as an entrepreneur. You have to be confident in what you're doing. You have to be confident in your team. You have to be confident. But do it with humility. Come in and recognize that you can learn. I still learn every day. When I give these presentations, I go back, I rewrite them because I learned something new about what I want to say or what I want to do. And finally, a statement to remember, and this is really critical. And this is one, if you don't get anything else out of this today, remember this. If you ask for money, you're going to get advice. Happens every time. But if you ask for advice and help, you'll get money. That'll happen. So, let's talk about what constitutes success in this industry. These are my little quotes that I like to leave you with. One of them is that I've used for a lot of years, is if you cater to the classes, you're going to sleep with the masses. But if you cater to the masses in what you're doing, you will sleep with the classes. I hope you all understand what that means. We're talking about the classes, the real rich people, right? If that's all you're selling to, you got to sell a lot of Bentleys to make a lot of money. So furthermore, to kind of take cover in the down days, measure your success not by the final outcome, rather by the path you take along the way. Nothing is guaranteed, and the journey is why we do it. If you're not doing this for the journey, if you're doing this believing you're going to be a multimillionaire at the back end, you're probably going to come out very, very disappointed and not fulfilled. So think about that. And if you are not willing to risk the usual, you will have to settle for the ordinary. So think about that one. If your ship doesn't come in, swim out and meet it. I think that one's really kind of a cool one, right? Because a lot of it is chasing that dream. You're going to go out and you're going to chase that dream. You're going to do it in your pitch. You're going to do it in what you do. Some people dream of great accomplishments while others stay awake and do them. I put that one in because it's really important to recognize as an entrepreneur, you are not going to work an 8-hour job. You are going to work a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week job. I have been on the phone numerous times all around the world, on weekends, at night, in the middle of the night, getting woken up at 2 o'clock in the morning. That's just part of this process. You will wake up and dream. A lot of employees get to leave their work at the office and come home and enjoy their family time. As an entrepreneur, it is a 24/7 job, and that's why I throw that in here. And I love the one that Richard Branson's always said because of his type of projects. I'm sure you all know who Richard Branson is, and I leave that with you in kind of wrapping up this presentation, and that's just screw it, let's do it. So thank you very much for your time today. And if you have any questions, we've got 5 to 10 minutes. Yes?
Top 3 qualities you look for in a potential partner, not as an investor, but as somebody you want to partner with.
Loyal. And by loyalty, I mean willing to do whatever it's going to take, no matter what. I think my old business partner described it perfectly. I don't care if you're an axe murderer. I only care about what you do in our partnership. So I'm really, really focused in how do you kind of integrate to what it is that we're doing. I'll give you a quote that always has concerned me over my career, and especially here in Utah, and that is, my family comes first. I think we all recognize that. For me, that's a quote for somebody who's looking for an excuse why they're not at the office or why they're not engaged. I think it's really, really I'm insulted when somebody says, well, my family comes first. Well, mine does too. But that doesn't mean that if I have to choose, right? If I've got a child that maybe just broke their leg, but I've got a critical item that's going to crater the business, what decision do you make there, right? That's a tough one. And I'm not saying there's a right or wrong answer. So I look for those indicators that say the person's not really going to dedicate what it really takes to be successful. Wow, third, energy. This takes a lot of energy. You're constantly going, and it just takes a lot of that. Other questions? Yes?
You mentioned something about finding a mentor at the beginning of the presentation. I was wondering, who was your mentor and how did they affect you?
I've had a couple mentors. I think my first mentor, obviously, I talked about in my presentation, which was my father. I had a really good role model to follow. I saw what it took to succeed in the corporate model. Beyond that, one of the early companies I joined, Bomar and Smith Corporation, I was in their corporate structure. Ed White was a great example of a mentor who just never gave up. I was in Bomar when they got delisted from the American Exchange, which is the precursor to the NASDAQ. So I've had a lot of really good mentors along the way. Sid Harmon from Harmon International. Here's a guy who built a very successful company, sold it off, went out to DC in the Carter administration, came back and bought it back because it had tanked. So I think there's a lot. Ann?
I was going to say, what do you look for in a mentor?
Wow. Somebody who will invest in you. I think that's the best decision. I spend a lot of time trying to mentor, and I really get involved, maybe even too deep sometimes. But I look for somebody who really is going to understand, spend the time, be compassionate, be understanding, be supportive, but at the same point in time, have that really firm hand, that person who is willing to say, Phil, that's really stupid. Sometimes you got to hear that. And a lot of people are afraid to say that. They don't want to insult somebody. And you need to hear that once in a while. Yes? No, I don't think the startup boom's going to come to a close. I think that it's encouraging a better ecosystem with better technologies coming out. I mean, I've seen a lot of things that have done really, really well. I mean, there's some really good examples, even out of this university. So I think, no, I don't think, I hope it enhances itself, increases, but more importantly, we've got to figure out how to get capital because we don't have big pots of capital. We have a lot of people with a lot of money, but they're really tight strings. You know, Plus 550 was a great example. It was Alan Hall, and we used to call it the 5 guys who were 50 who had made big, big money, right? And even getting through their system, it was kind of like a boys' club. So I'm hoping that we get better sources of capital here. It's important, really important. So, yes?
You talked a little bit about patents and things and how important those are. Before presenting to people like you or yourself or other groups, how important is that really in ours? We don't know if they're good ideas or not, right? So how do we know when it's a good idea to get a patent or when it starts the process like that?
Well, the patent landscape's really, really interesting because getting a patent anymore, you got to look at all the elements around the patent, right? A lot of it depends on what it is that you're doing. And for me, it's more when you're looking for investors, it's more do you understand that process, right? Recognizing that if you have a really cool technology that you want to patent, but you've already gone out and tried to sell it, you've lost your opportunity. It's really understanding what that landscape looks like and means and what it means to the long-term value proposition that you're presenting. And so that's why I talk about the freedom to operate, right? The freedom to operate is really, really critical. It's great to get a patent, but you have to be able to use that patent. And there's so many patents out there today. How do you make sure that you're not infringing on somebody else's patent? So it's more about understanding and knowing when the time is right, where you go with it, how you go about it. Just spend the time to and there's some small publications out there that will really give you the basis of knowledge that you need for that. We're timed out.